Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and instead of a Friday Reads today, I am here with a wrap-up vlog of my amazing weekend at Booktopia. This is an annual event that my mother and I attend every year. This was our 8th year. It has been held at Northshire Books in Manchester, Vermont. Fabulous town and an amazing bookstore for the last 12 years, with a couple of years off for the pandemic. It is just an amazing bookish weekend, very different from your typical author event at a bookstore or book festival or conference, because of the interactive nature of it and because it's relatively intimate compared to most big book events. This year there were 10 authors, and depending on which day you were counting, anywhere from 80 to 100 attendees. And you hang out with the authors all weekend. It's not like you just get a reading from an author and then they leave. They come to dinner with us and play book trivia with us, and you really get to know the authors. Many of us, readers, attendees, come back year after year, so you really get to know the attendees. But if you're new to Booktopia, by the time you leave, you will have dozens of new best book friends. It's just the atmosphere. It's very fun. It's very warm and welcoming every single year, and this year was no exception. Many of the authors say, this is unlike any other author event I've ever attended. One of the authors who said that this year was Jennifer Haig, and she's been writing novels for 20 years. So she's been to a lot of book events. But Booktopia really is unique. So I'm going to try to give you just a little peek into all the fun. And I hope it will inspire you to join us next year. It's usually the first weekend in May in Manchester, Vermont. And I encourage you to make plans now. Put it on your calendar for next year. Okay, I'm ready to get on the road. Vermont or bust. Actually, my first stop is Connecticut to pick up my mom. I had hoped to leave a few minutes earlier, but this is pretty early for me. It's about 10 o'clock. And car's all packed. I am ready to go, praying that the Jersey Turnpike traffic gods are with me. I'm making good time, just about the halfway point, so I stopped for a restroom break. Ride's been easy so far. First part of the drive is really pretty, actually. Lots of trees and everything's fully in bloom right now. The rest is a little trickier. Northern Jersey is exactly the way you picture it, with lots of traffic, but doing well. Made it to Connecticut, definitely ready for a break, for lunch and a nap, and then it's back in the car again with my mom. We are here in East Chatham, New York at the Gnome Bistro. We stopped here for dinner last year. It's a perfect stopping point because it's right on our way. And my husband and I came here last year when we were camping in this area. You can see how it got its name. And it's a really cute cafe inside. So it is 9 o'clock at night. My mom and I just arrived in Manchester, Vermont about a half hour ago. Checked in. We're staying at the Kimpton Taconic, which is a beautiful hotel. We usually stay in kind of a rundown old guest house run by an older man, because it's a block from the bookstore, which works out really well for us because we're on different schedules. so that way one of us can just walk to the bookstore. But he wasn't available this year, and so this is where the big dinner event is tomorrow night. So a little change of plans this morning. The place that I've been talking about on my channel for breakfast, Up for Breakfast, which I always go to on Friday morning before Booktopia starts, is closed for renovations. Thankfully, it does reopen tomorrow, so my mom and I will go there on Sunday. But for this morning, my friend and I are just going to have breakfast here at the hotel. So that's the plan. And I did notice this morning that I have a beautiful view from my room. You can see the trees are just starting to bud out here, and there's a little bit of clouds right now, but that is the Green Mountains right outside my window. So here I am in Manchester Center, wonderful little town. Some great restaurants here. Breakfast was good, it was delicious. A little slow, but had fun catching up with my friend. And I'm going to check in for Booktopia. Just wanted to show you how pretty this little town is. Some of our meetings will be in the sanctuary of the church there, or in the back room of the church, and others in the bookstore itself, just to accommodate all the different groups that are going on at once. And there it is, Northshire Bookstore, the place where the magic happens. It's a great little well, not little, it's an enormous bookstore. It fills this whole big house, and it is so much fun. I'll show you around inside.
Is that the new, is that? Yeah, right. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, is this just? It's a free, spot that had an area map. I can't remember where it was because it was just.
It always kicks off with an event called "This Gift Card is Burning a Hole in My Pocket." With every registration fee, each attendee gets a $50 gift card to the bookstore, and this is one of the most amazing indie bookstores I've ever been to. Maybe the best. It is just enormous. It is beautifully curated. It's beautiful in itself. And so for this part of the event, each of the booksellers and one of the owners gets up to talk about 5 or 6 books that they recommend. So I've got little video clips of each of those, but I will also include photos of the recommendation sheets they handed out.
Many, many years ago, I had the opportunity to introduce Geraldine Brooks at a Northshire event, and I was intimidated. She was, after all, a Pulitzer Prize winning author in the company of Hemingway and Faulkner. I met her up at the Equinox Hotel, and on the drive down to the bookstore, it just didn't feel like what I imagined talking to Ernest Hemingway would be like. In fact, she was so outgoing and friendly, I finally got up the nerve to ask if she minded if I called her Geraldine. She just looked at me and she said, "What else are you going to call me?"
And it is The Sirens by Amelia Hart, which is the highly anticipated follow-up to her much-loved debut, Wayward. This is a haunting, beautiful tale of motherhood, sisterhood, and rape culture, told through multiple perspectives that feels timely and timeless. When Lucy is assaulted on her university campus, which is an experience, unfortunately, many of us and many of the people that you love are familiar with, she runs to her estranged older sister Jess, who has always known what to do, only to find Jess missing and her seaside house abandoned. Lucy's search for answers about the disappearance leads her to uncover clues about not only her family's muddled past, but the historical mysteries of the town that she can't stop dreaming about, mostly centered around this mysterious shipwreck when Australia was first being settled by prisoners from the UK.
And then here's my entry into the weird girl genre. And it'll sound a lot like Bethany's pick, I think, but it's in this book, Adina, you can read her as someone maybe who's neurodivergent and sees herself as an alien, but the book is like, Adina is an alien. And I just went with that, and it was so effective. So it's called Beautyland by Marie-Hélène Bertino. I just saw her speaking at a conference. She's amazing. She has a new book of short stories coming out. If you like this, there's more. I love this quirky novel about a bright girl from Philadelphia who sees the world and places around her from the point of view. Adina is an alien sent to Earth to observe and report on the human species by faxing her droll yet keen observations back to her home planet. So there's a fax machine. Her story unfolds across 4 decades as she processes the contradictions that make humanity such a baffling yet ultimately beautiful species. Adina's engaging voice and the generous cast of characters that kept me emotionally engaged until the inevitable and poignant end. It offers fresh perspectives on family, friendship, love, and loss, and it was just wonderful.
So last year, when you all were doing your book exchange, I saw some TJ claims, and I asked a few of you, are we into fantasy and romance? And I got some yeses, so I wanted to do that, bring a couple of those to the spotlight this year. So this is The Skull Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This came to my attention from Bethany. It is an absolutely sweet, cozy rom-com with magical creatures. So Keela works at a library. She's very quiet. She doesn't have friends. She loves her books. Her only companion is Kaz, her sidekick Spider Plant, who is sassy and funny and wonderful. He alone needs a spinoff. When a fire breaks out in the library, her thought is, we have to save these books. These books are all magical books. They have spells in them. So she loads up a boat with the books and heads out, knowing that this is also pretty illegal, but she wants to save the books. She goes back to her home island where she had lived as a kid with her parents before her parents brought her to the city for thinking there would be a better life there. And she finds her own old cottage where her parents lived and decides that she needs to make some income. So she sets up a jam store, she sells her jams, and she starts playing with the spells in the books and realizing that the things that are happening, on the island that are problematic, the weather is turning, there are storms coming, crops are dying. She starts to use her magic to bring the island back to life.
Next up is just silly. This is just ridiculous because sometimes, particularly perhaps in current times, you need a good reason to laugh. So this is When the Moon Hits Your Eye by John Scalzi. Scalzi, I think, is sort of one of the really good satirists writing today. He has a great sense of humor, but he captures something that's easily poke-funnable about contemporary society and everything that he writes. When the Moon Hits Your Eye, the incredibly ridiculous premise is that one day the moon turns to cheese. And the book follows the course of one lunar cycle and exactly what that happens. It's told from a whole bunch, it sort of skips around, so it's, what's happening at this museum and what's this billionaire up to and what's the president up to. It's utterly ridiculous. I laughed out loud through the whole thing. He does have some good points to make about contemporary society, but really you're just reading this because you want to have a really good time with your book, as you should. And that is When the Moon Hits Your Eye by John Scalzi.
And I can't get through Booktopia without talking about Hernan Diaz at least once. I don't think I talked about this last year, but I'm pretty sure I read it after Booktopia. But this is also not a new book. This was his first novel, published by a small press, Coffee House Press. And he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for this book. If you liked Trust, this book isn't like Trust at all, except the writing is just as great. But it's about the character named Hakan, and Hakan grew up in Sweden, and he and his brother are sent, their father sends him to America for a better life. They go to England where they're going to get on a ship for New York, and they immediately get separated, and Hakan ends up in San Francisco instead of New York. But he has it in his head that he's going to go find his brother. So he spends the rest of his life just crisscrossing the American West. And he doesn't speak the language at first, doesn't know how to take care of himself, falls in with a lot of people who don't have his best interests at heart. But it's just such a great, incredibly well-written book about loneliness and survival and friendship again. If you read Trust and you liked it because the writing was good, I think you will like In the Distance as well.
Then the author sessions begin. This year was a little bit different. They had one bookseller or the owner, Nicole, interviewing two authors at a time, usually. There were a couple of sessions with just one author. And that worked out really well. It was made for a really interesting conversation. They combined the authors in ways that really made sense. And as I said, it's very interactive. So it was an interview up on stage, with the bookseller or owner asking the authors questions, but much of it was open to questions from the audience. And we had lots of questions. In many cases, these books were released before Booktopia began. And so many of us read them before the event so that we can talk to the authors about their books.
He got years ago that gave him caterpillar textured dots on his testicles. I'm not sure I believe Toby's fuzzy button stories because I sure as hell have never seen fuzzy pink dots on any man's anything. I think he said they were purple gray. Do not fear fuzzy buttons. Raquel threw all her limbs in the air and let them flop back to the floor. Fine, there's still AIDS, pregnancy. Stop. Condoms, okay? But listen, if you were in college, this would be freshman year. And most people who haven't lost it already lose their virginity freshman year. Your mother had you at choose your age. She wasn't a virgin. I love my mother, but I don't want her life in any way. I mean, I really don't want to work at Hardware Depot and end up with my generation's version of Howard. You work at iMagnet for now. I'm telling you, we're going to go to blue light. You need to be out in the world like the iMagnet girl you are and make out with someone who is nothing like Howard so you can see you're not your mom. You get to choose how you live your life. Sometimes it seems like you choose how I live my life. I was only half joking. Fine, I'm simply making suggestions. Fine, I said. But what if no one wants to make out with me? Stop. Anyone will make out with you. All you have to do is choose the guy. Let him think that he's choosing you. Then if you decide you want to make out with him, you give him the signal. But I don't know the signal. This is the problem, Raquel. I don't know how any of these things work. I don't know the signal. I don't know how to kiss. I don't know how you choose a guy and be the chooser, or how you decide if you want to be the choosy and let them think they're being the chooser, when in fact you're choosing them and choose you. Enough. Raquel stood. Meet me in your room for the Jordache jeans. Raquel's Jordache jeans had become too big for her since she lost weight. They now fit me, but I could only wear them when Raquel was home to help me get them on. I guess you're being the chooser, but I wear too. I slipped off my skirt and walked to the bedroom. The jeans were sitting on top of my dresser. Raquel handed them to me and I stepped in and pulled them up. The fly remained open in a wide letter V. Ready? Raquel asked. Go for it. I lay back on the bed, sucked in my stomach, and held the button as close to the buttonhole as possible. Raquel straddled my legs, grabbed the pull tab, and worked the zipper up. It was like trying to stuff an overstuffed, it was like trying to close an overstuffed suitcase. Help me stand, I said, once the button was secured. I couldn't bend to sit up and would have to work on loosening the jeans in the car.
No, she just went on her first real life date in her 40s. And are you allowed to curse in this church? What will happen? What God think?
I don't think anything about it.
Okay, we'll see. I guess we'll see. Everyone just gird your loins. Well, yeah, that's anatomy. That's a word. Okay. Rachel awoke to the sound of her almost dead phone trilling with a FaceTime and jolted up sick from worry about her kids, her half-awake brain's default. But it was her sister, who had just had a baby, and thought 8 in the morning was a perfectly normal time for the violence of an unplanned phone call. Video call, sorry. That makes it more aggressive, you know? Rachel scrambled to plug in her phone, propped it against the arm of her couch, and answered, trying to smooth out her tousled hair. Wow, what happened to you? Becky's face jostled on the screen. Rachel could tell she was bouncing the baby. Rachel's only little nephew, whom she'd never gotten to hold, still in the homely stage of newborn life, wrinkly and pissed off and bumpy with infant acne. Becky and the baby both looked like hell, but you really couldn't say that. And Rachel could tell from her self-view how tired she was of self-view. She hasn't figured out how to turn it off yet. That she looked disheveled and smudged and, well, like she'd been out all night. The rocker, she told Becky. Wait, what? What? I just spent the night at a guy's place. Rachel laughed, not quite believing it herself. Rachel, are you fucking with me? You went out with a guy named the Rocker? I mean, that's not the same, that's what we call him. Me and Lulu, that's her best friend. We've been giving all our dates nicknames so we can tell them apart. His name is really Diego, but yeah, I spent the night with him. They giggled now, like they were back in their bunk beds at their grandparents' beach house. The week each year, they'd shared a room and gotten along out of family crowded necessity. What? Fuck, Rachel, I was just gonna ask for some baby advice. Now I need the whole story. Oh, what's the baby up to now? Rachel stretched and yawned. Why couldn't Becky have had a baby years earlier, when Rachel was having her babies? They could have raised their kids together, out on Long Island, in a happy little beach commune. Now Rachel was so far past the baby stage, she'd forgotten all the details, but not so far past that she wanted to hear about them again. He's being a real dick, is what he's up to, Becky said, nuzzling his head. I swear to God, how did you do this 3 times in a row? Well, as you'll recall, I didn't exactly mean to, but also, I don't know. I was definitely not okay there for a while. Rachel thought for a moment. It really does help to have mom friends.
So this is the beautiful hotel we're staying in, the Taconic. It's a Kimpton Taconic. Really pretty, you can see, with a big front porch. And this is where tonight's event will be for Booktopia, dinner and book trivia, which is a lot of fun. Had breakfast in the restaurant this morning, which was delicious. They've got a fire pit out here. Just a really nice place to stay. And it has turned into a beautiful day. It's in the 70s, believe it or not. That's unusual for this time of year up here, at least in my experience. And the rain stopped. We've got some blue sky up there. So, yeah, it turned into a decent day. I'm going to take my nap. Unfortunately, I have to miss a couple of the author events for that, but nothing to do about that. It's necessary. So, gonna hurry up and rest. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, and get back there, hopefully catch a couple of sessions at the end of the day.
Reserved for those foreign students who want to stay an extra year in this country to do an internship or to work. So this is a rather unconventional novel. It's told as a series of conversations that the main character, Pavitra, has with the various people she encounters during her year of optional practical training. She has just graduated, and the novel is set in 2006, and it takes place over a year. She's just graduated from college with a degree in physics, and she has this secret desire to be a writer. So she moves to Boston to take a job as a teacher in a private school. And she encounters, people that you would expect someone in her situation to encounter, her fellow teachers, colleagues, students. Given the nature of the diaspora, there's always someone here before you. So she has conversations with people whom she's known growing up in India, who have come here before she has. She also has to play host to a cousin who sort of follows in her footsteps. And I, as an immigrant myself, am sort of more interested. I'm interested more in the inner landscapes and the atmosphere around the immigrant experience than I am in the actual events. And so, even though this is a first-person narrative, it's kind of like a portrait in negative, because I find conversations really fascinating. I think that we form our identities through conversations. The things that people say to us and about us inform our sense of who we are. And I think for an immigrant, especially, conversations also sort of form mirrors to the host culture. Because the things that people say to an immigrant, to an outsider, to a foreigner, reflect back on America, or the very particular slice of American society that this narrator anyway has sort of parachuted into.
So, Rabbit Moon is my 8th novel, and it's a book I wrote sort of by accident. I had been working on an earlier novel, Mercy Street, when I got a fellowship to write and live in China for 3 months. And so I went there with the intention of continuing to work on Mercy Street, what I would normally do when I travel, keep doing what I'm doing. But soon after getting to Shanghai, it was very clear to me that was going to be impossible. I could not even remember what Boston looked like, so to write a story set there was just beyond me. So I started writing a story set there, in the building where I was living. So I was in this tall apartment tower, which, like many buildings in China, has a mix of apartments and businesses on every floor. So I was on the 23rd floor, 2 doors down from a hair salon. And I became very fascinated with the comings and goings of people from the salon. In particular, this beautiful young man, sort of androgynous young Chinese man who worked as a hairstylist. I would see him in the elevator and smoking cigarettes on the sidewalk outside. And so he became an early character in this story. Rabbit Moon opens, and this is not a spoiler because it literally happens on page 2. Rabbit Moon opens with a traffic accident. There's a young American woman who is hit by a car very early on a Sunday morning in the financial district of Shanghai. And the story proceeds from there. This young woman is estranged from her American parents. She's dropped out of college. She's in China ostensibly teaching English. And her parents really don't know what she's up to. They think she's living in Beijing teaching English when in fact she has moved to Shanghai and is doing an entirely different kind of work. It is a story about a family in crisis, a family that has been in crisis for a very long time, and in particular about what happens to this lost daughter, who is a really talented and physically very beautiful young woman who has had a couple of experiences that have kind of derailed her life, including a love affair with a much older man, a friend of her parents, when she was only 16. And so this central character, Lindsay, is kind of a lost person. And while she's being lost in China, this horrible accident happens. And so it really grew out of my own growing paranoia about traffic in Shanghai, which in 2016 was ungodly. I'd never seen anything like it. 20 years earlier, it would have been very unusual for a middle-class Chinese person to own a car, but by 2016, cars were everywhere, and Shanghai was one big traffic jam. So on a nearly daily basis, I saw a fender bender, or a pedestrian accident, a bike accident, a motorcycle accident, to the point where I got really paranoid about crossing the street. And I found myself perseverating about this. Well, my God, what would happen if I got hit by a car in China? Then what? Well, I guess they would go to the American consulate, and I guess they would track down my family. Well, then what? I guess they'd come here. Well, then what? And so this is how this story unfolded for me. It was a series of then whats. So that is what happens. This young woman is hit by a car. Very early in the story, her parents are contacted, and they do what any parents would do. They get on a plane and go to China. This is complicated by the fact that they're divorced. They hate each other. They haven't been in the same room since their divorce was filed. And here they are being forced to deal with each other in this very extreme situation to navigate the healthcare system in a country they've never traveled to before, in a language they don't understand. So that is the situation at the beginning of Rabbit Moon.
Friday night, there's a cocktails, dinner, and book trivia for everyone, authors included. It is so much fun. Each table has an author at it, so, and my team won this year. Very much thanks to one of our team members who has twin toddlers at home. And one of the bonus questions in book trivia this year was name everything in Goodnight Moon that they say goodnight to. Well, many of us remembered it from decades ago, vaguely, but she has been reading it over and over and over to her toddlers, and she named 16 of the 17 items. So we had a ringer.
I'm wondering about the writing process of writing a novel within a novel. Was that harder, easier, freeing because it was short, or oh my God, I only have 20 pages?
Yeah.
That's like what all that.
Well, I was in the middle of writing the plot, which took 4 months during the pandemic. That's its own story. And I remember I was sitting on the couch, I was writing, but I was also listening to an interview with Lily King. And she was talking about her novel, Lovers and Writers?
Yeah, right.
Writers and Lovers?
Mm-hmm.
And the interviewer, might have been Terry Gross, I remember, said, now,
your protagonist is writing this novel, and then the novel becomes very successful, but you choose not to give us any of the novel. Why is that? And Lily King said, I realized that no sample or excerpt that I could produce would be as good as what we imagined it to be, so I decided not to do it, and I thought, oh, great, I don't have to do it either. And I turned in the manuscript of the plot without any of those excerpts. And my editor said, weren't you gonna get excerpts of the novel? And I said, yeah, but Lily King's not doing it, so I have to do it. He said, no, you have to do it. And so, you know, I had just finished the novel, and now I had to write another novel, but as you pointed out, you know, excerpts, not as difficult, but you still have to have the plot of that novel, the characters, the settings, the situations. It was a challenge, but of course I'm happy that I did it, because those excerpts of the novel within the novel are clues, and they're part of the kind of exchange about writing, and how we often assume that things are true, even if it's fiction, even if the person writing the fiction doesn't know the truth. We have this kind of automatic setting as readers to believe what we're reading, just as we have an automatic setting as readers to identify with the protagonist, even if we don't like them or wouldn't like them in real life. Both things I think are absolutely fascinating. So I did that with the plot, and then I did it again with the sequel, and I must say it's become a particular challenge, but also kind of fun. Thanks.
Middle of the second day on Saturday, there's a session where each of the authors, all the authors are there, all the attendees are there, and each of the authors gets 10 minutes. Usually they read a little excerpt from their work that they're there for, but some of the authors this year chose to read something else they had written, or even discuss the inspiration for their book. It's always very entertaining.
I laughed, and I thought, oh, is that an interesting day, or is that just an embarrassing thing? And then that same day I was talking to some editor who was at Breadloaf, and you never run a day when who's reading your book. Maybe Jean does, because she's got millions. But you always, every writer here, I can guarantee you, wants to run into somebody on the subway reading their book. Like, we all want, like, that's what we want more than just about anything. So, but when you're at a writer's conference, or, you know, one of those places, you might. So I was in Breadloaf, and I was talking to some woman, and she said, what's your name? And I told her, she said, I read your short, and she had read a short story I had in the magazine. She started telling me how she loved it. And of course, I'm like almost shaking. I think, she likes my story, she likes me, she's an editor. And then she said, do you have a book? And I said, I lied. And I said, yes. And she said, what's the name of it? And all I had was that sentence, and I said, The Summer of Naked Swim Parties. And she said, well, send it to me when you're done. So then I better go home and write that book. So that was my first book.
I moved to Cornish, New Hampshire from Burlington, Vermont, where I lived from 2001 to 2016. I needed to get away from the big city. But I did. I needed quiet. I couldn't stand everything that was that reminded me of civilization. I really got depressed. It really messed with my head for some reason. I became very anxious. Loud noises frightened me. My therapist said I still had PTSD from my childhood, which is probably true. And it's fun, because you're laughing. You can laugh. That's good. And yeah, so I moved to Cornish and been extremely happy in New Hampshire. And most of my cartoons come from being out in the woods. But there did come a point in my life where I started to become way more curious about everything. Even if I'm in the woods looking at trees and walking, sans LSD or psilocybin sober, that experience is deep meditation for me, and it completely inspires my heart, totally. But alternately, if I go to a Walmart, it's with equal fascination for me. And it didn't used to be the case. used to sort of judge everything at Walmart, but now I just find it all fascinating. It's just amazing at what's going on in the world right now. All of it. A leaf is just mind-blowing. And I think as an artist, and a lot of this is in the book. I talk a lot about nature and Cornish and being an artist and being an observer. And I can't be sure if what's going on right now with me about losing a dog and loss and suffering and pain and grief is an age thing. Maybe as you get older, you become more vulnerable to emotions. I don't know what's going on.
Among all possible writers to bring it to life, that great idea didn't just leave you to spin your stupid and ineffectual wheels. It actually went to somebody else. A great story, in other words, wanted to be told. And if you weren't going to tell it, it was out of here. He was going to find another writer who would, and you would be reduced to watching somebody else write and publish your book. Intolerable. Good writers borrow, great writers steal, Jake was thinking. That ubiquitous phrase was attributed to T.S. Eliot, which didn't mean Eliot himself hadn't stolen it, but Eliot had been talking perhaps less than seriously about the theft of actual language, phrases and sentences and paragraphs, not of a story itself. Besides, Jake knew, as Eliot had known, as all artists ought to know, that every single story, like every single work of art, from the cave paintings to whatever was playing at the Park Theater in Cobleskill to his own puny books, was in conversation with every other work of art, bouncing against its predecessors, drawing from its contemporaries, harmonizing with the patterns. All of it, paintings and choreography and poetry and photography and performance art and the ever-fluctuating novel, was whirling away in an unstoppable spin art machine of its own. And that was a beautiful, thrilling thing. He would hardly be the first to take some tale from a play or a book, in this case, a book that had never even been written, and create something entirely new from it. Miss Saigon from Madame Butterfly, The Hours from Mrs. Dalloway, The Lion King from Hamlet, for goodness sake. It wasn't even taboo, and certainly it wasn't theft. Even if Evan's manuscript actually existed at the time of his death, Jake had never seen more than a couple of pages of the thing, and he remembered little of what he had seen. The mother on the psychic hotline, the daughter writing about carpetbaggers, the ring of pineapples around the door of the old house. Surely what he himself might make from so little would belong to him, and only to him.
However, an hour had passed and Yuri was not there. No one was there. When I called Orla for help, she was confused to hear from me. I thought you were here already, she said. Yuri told me he picked you up hours ago. I saw you from the window, she said. We waved, I waved, you blew me a kiss. And then Yuri came onto the phone himself. Hello, my friend, he said. Where did you go? And I said, I'm here at the airport on the curb, waiting for you. I was being interrogated by the police, I said, which he didn't understand because hours ago, he told me the two of us had driven from the airport to his sister's house. On the drive, apparently, we had talked about many beautiful things. For example, the various inaccuracies of pre-modern astronomy, much of which was lovely in its miscalculation. For instance, Ptolemy's idea of the universe is a series of nested and concentric spheres in which all matter is both transparent and also rotating all around us, in which everything is made of a material so perfect it cannot be broken. Imagine that, I had apparently said. A vision of the world we had not yet figured out how to break into pieces of itself. And they said, wait, you're obviously confusing me with someone else. I have no idea about any of this. And he said, oh yes, you do, my friend. You made me cry when you were describing all of our beautiful and historical idiocies. I had to step away from the curb just then because my interrogator appeared beside me. He was leading a pair of prisoners in handcuffs onto a police bus that was waiting. As he passed, he smiled and he rubbed his finger beneath his nose in the international sign of cocaine use. I have to say, he told me, I am already feeling very deeply in love. I am aging backwards in the mind right now as we speak. We have an empty seat on the bus, he said. You want to come? And then he laughed very hard, too hard. And he said, maybe we make you come. And then he rubbed his nose once more and asked, maybe could I have just a little extra for the ride, a little of that flower that we let you keep so I can go into orbit temporarily.
He said, that's right, there's a good girl, and she wanted to be a good girl, and she never wanted to be a good girl again. Chapter 4. Do I turn here? Rachel, where's the turn? Was that the turn? That was the turn now, I missed it. God damn it. Josh slammed his hand on the steering wheel and sped up along the expressway. For some reason, he always drove faster when he was worried he was lost. Already, I'm like, ugh. Here she is. Like waking up from a dream she'd known was too good to be true, Rachel was back in the passenger seat of the still shared family car as Josh drove and swore at her. She tried to lean forward to read the next exit sign, but the seatbelt caught and bound her. I don't use the GPS like a normal human being. She was a wife again, a zombie of a wife, resurrected from the dead, pissed off and unholy. You know I don't trust technology, he said darkly, veering off at the next ramp. Wow, you guys, said Risa from the back seat, where she and Sadie bookended a snoozing Holden. This is really fun, listening to you two bicker just like the good old days. Their family trip to the shore was upon them. By the end of the school year, New York City public school students slogged through the bitter dregs of June, sat camera off through their last day celebrations. It's 2020, if I didn't already say that. Then closed out of their Google Classrooms and silently started their summers. The Perfect Person chatbot was almost ready to beta test. It was, anyway, in better shape than Rachel's work chatbot project, which had been stymied, as her professional endeavors tended to be, by endless meetings and let's circle backs and middle management prevarications. Meanwhile, she'd been texting with the kinky playwright, the married guy, the rocker, the college crush, a woman named Susanna. Her best friend had just been calling her the woman. But she was starting to realize that cultivating an entire team took a lot of energy. Soon the perfect person would be ready, and maybe life would be a little less exhausting, or anyway, talking to someone who was unfailingly lovely would make her feel a little less alone. She did really feel alone. Not exactly lonely, but not unlonely. Despite what she felt were the triumphs of sex with new people, despite all the texting, despite having her friends to check in with, so much of the time Rachel was just alone in a room. It was a familiar feeling. Her marriage had been lonely, particularly at the end. She couldn't fathom the way people talked about preserving lackluster partnerships. Her friend Natalie had actually said to her, sometimes I don't want to be married anymore, but I also don't want to be lonely or start over. What was lonelier than a marriage gone stale with contempt?
I took the red line to Park Street and spotted my cousin as soon as I stepped out at the station. She was standing by one of those souvenir stalls at the edge of the common, her profile to me, bareheaded, hands pushed deep for warmth into the pockets of the thin coat. The day was bright but frigid. Snow from last week's storm was still heaped everywhere, sidewalks patched with dirty ice. She seemed to be observing with some longing the stall's woolen hats and gloves, most of them Red Sox memorabilia, but I felt protective of her. My little cousin, who had never before traveled off the subcontinent, so had no conception of what it meant to be cold. Whose brand new clothes, all purchased no doubt for the occasion of her trip to Boston, offered little insulation from the late December chill. Her shoes were shiny patent leather, and her jeans were baggy, the kind I used to wear as a teenager in Bangalore. Her voice was nearly a shriek as she greeted me, and I wondered for a moment if women's voices in India were higher than they were here. She said she felt fine, no jet lag at all. She'd slept in the Dubai airport lounge and again on the flight to Logan, and then slept until 5:30 that morning at her uncle's in Quincy. Her grin showed protruding teeth with gaps. As we walked down Tremont to the gathering point for guided tours of the Freedom Trail, I apologized for not being able to give her a place to stay. When I was still living at the landlord's mother's, she'd asked if she could crash with me, at least until she found accommodations of her own, and I'd said regretfully that my place was too small. The house had spare rooms, but I'd shied from the prospect of a family member staying there. the old lady watching us with her hostile, curious gaze, my cousin's sing-song speech and her accent, much more pronounced than mine. It was the heavy Tamilian accent that even in Bangor would have been mimicked and mocked. The landlord's sister scolding me in front of my cousin, implicating us both in the neglect of her mother, and then my cousin reporting to her parents, who relayed to mine, that I was living in a shabby room in a shabby American house whose owners were scary and rude, prompting my mother to call and chastise me, saying she didn't understand why I was living like a vagabond in America. This is my long-term plan. Since we had half an hour before the next tour, I led her to a Starbucks on the side street. Hot chocolate, she said eagerly, and I ordered two. She uncapped her drink and licked the whipped cream off the lid. Too good, she said, beaming. The first time she was having a proper hot chocolate. It was one of the things she wanted to make sure she tried here before going back to India. The other was pizza. She wrapped her hands around the paper cup. We were sitting on bar stools by the window, her thick braid bereft of the string of jasmine she would pin to it at home, hanging unadorned to her waist. There were gloves and a hat in her bag, she said. She just wanted to fully feel the cold. The coldest cold she'd ever felt in her life. Crazy, she said as she clutched her cup, still shivering but smiling, lips drawn back over her misaligned teeth, her large, lustrous eyes roving with excitement. A family friend in Chennai, who'd spent many years in Canada, had told her to practice for the winter by sitting in the fridge. She suspected no refrigerator would prepare her for cold like this. She'd never felt her hands and the tips of her ears burned with cold, hadn't known it was possible. It's crazy, she repeated. But she wanted the experience. It was part of the whole adventure.
I'm sorry, I'd say to my students, don't listen to me. Who am I to dictate how your story unfolds? Because there is no other place to start mine than with a phone call. That phone call is all I have. I'm on the couch under a mound of blankets, crumpled tissues and cold cups of tea and capsules of Tylenol clutter the coffee table. My cell phone is beside me, its ringtone set as loud as it will go. Each ear-splitting notification triggers a sickening surge of stress hormones, but I don't dare silence unknown callers. I've hung up on friends and fraudsters alike, cursing each call that isn't about David. It's close to midnight when it comes. The phone rings, vibrates, lights up like a searchlight in a dark apartment. I answer with shaking hands slipped by sweat. Hello? A woman's voice, deep and deeply tired. Is this Mrs. O'Shea? Well, that's not yes, I'm David O'Shea's wife, Audrey Beacon. How is he? Oh, sorry, it's right here. Audrey Beacon's spouse. The caller identifies herself as a nurse, gives her name, names the hospital. She pauses before saying, I'm very sorry to inform you that David O'Shea died tonight. Died? This makes no sense to me. Until a week ago, David was a perfectly healthy 33-year-old who grew up hale and hearty on his family's farm in Ireland. People like him don't drop dead from some random virus, even when bad enough to send him to the hospital. This is obviously a mistake, I think. There must be 100 older, weaker men in New York City named David O'Shea. I'm certain the nurse is talking about one of them. Are you sure? I am, yes. Her words are muffled by a mask, but she makes their meaning clear. I was in the room with him when he was pronounced. We did everything we could, but his lungs were too damaged by the time we had an available ventilator.
My mother is sleeping on the dock by the pond. She is sleeping very soundly, curled like a cat on the edge furthest out over the water in dappled shade. Every once in a while she rolls sideways, stretches out a leg, and preens herself with a quick stroke of her head. When she first arrived, she took a swim, splashed her face in the water, and threw some bright beads over her back, lingered for a while in the reeds by the edge. The feeling I had as I watched her was of contentment, even joy, and of being at peace in this gorgeous morning light of early autumn, amber and slanted and full of poetry. And now she sleeps. She seems so very tired, as if she has gone through a mighty battle and a long journey, as if she has passed over storms and seen the heavens, which she has. She is gone, my mother, and her spirit is returning. In new forms, today and yesterday, in the body of this mother mallard, who rests in my garden. I recognized her immediately, as one does with someone you have loved so long. Her spirit is finding ways to give my heart solace. This rest and this pleasure in the small things in life, a swim in cold water, golden morning light, a nap in the grass, and a stretch of strong limbs, was long denied for my mother, who died a few days ago in a care home for people with Alzheimer's dementia. This is especially tragic because my mother was a person who was not only most at home outdoors, but who adored the small pleasures of life.
Finally, it wraps up on Saturday. There's a Yankee book swap for anyone who wants to participate. We were exhausted by that point and skipped the book swap. Instead, we went to dinner with a bunch of our friends, had a great time. And on Sunday before we left town, my mom and I ate at Up for Breakfast. Best breakfast restaurant anywhere. So it was an amazing weekend.